and despair. I am aware that happiness depends on my mental attitude and not on external conditions, and that I can live happily in the present moment simply by remembering that I already have more than enough conditions to be happy. I am committed to practicing right livelihood so that I can help reduce the suffering of living beings on earth and stop contributing to climate change. True love. Aware of the suffering caused by sexual misconduct, I am committed to cultivating responsibility and learning ways to protect the safety and integrity of individuals, couples, families, and society, knowing that sexual desire is not love and that sexual activity motivated by craving always harms myself as well as others. I am determined not to engage in sexual relations without true love and a deep, long term commitment made known to my family and friends. I will do everything in my power to protect children from sexual abuse and to prevent couples and families from being broken by sexual misconduct. Seeing that body and mind are one, I am committed to learning appropriate ways to take care of my sexual energy and cultivating loving kindness, joy, and inclusiveness, which is the four basic elements of true love, for my greater happiness and for the greater happiness of others. Practicing true love, we know we will continue beautifully into the future. Loving speech and deep listening. Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful speech and the inability to listen to others, I am committed to cultivating loving speech and compassionate listening in order to relieve suffering and to promote reconciliation and peace in myself and among other people, ethnic and religious groups, and nations. Knowing that words can create happiness and suffering, I am committed to speaking truthfully using words that inspire confidence, joy, and hope. When anger is manifesting in me, I am determined not to speak. I will practice mindful breathing and walking in order to recognize and look deeply into my anger. I will know that the roots of suffering are found in my wrong perceptions and lack of understanding of the suffering in myself and any other person. I will speak and listen in ways that can help me and the other person that I'm more suffering and see the way out of difficult situations. I am determined not to spread news that I do not know to be certain and not to utter words that can cause division or discord. I will practice right diligence to nourish my capacity for understanding love, joy, and inclusiveness, and gradually transform the anger, violence, and fear that are deep in my consciousness. Nourishment and healing. Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful consumption, I am committed to cultivating good health, both physical and mental, myself, my family, and my society by practicing mindful eating, drinking, and consuming. I will practice looking deeply into how I consume the four kinds of nutriments, namely edible foods, sense impression, volition, and consciousness. I am determined not to gamble, to use alcohol, drugs, or any other products which contain toxins, such as certain websites, electronic games, TV programs, films, magazines, books, and conversations. I will practice coming back to the present moment to be in touch with the refreshing, healing, and nourishing elements in me and around me, not letting regrets and sorrow drag me back into the past, letting anxieties, fear, or craving pull me out of the present moment. I am determined not to try to cover up loneliness, anxiety, or other suffering by losing myself in consumption. I will practice interbeing and content in a way that preserves peace, joy, and well being in my body and consciousness, and the collective body and consciousness of my family, my society, and the earth. We'll remain in noble silence until the beginning of service.
this point, I'd like to invite our incense lighters up. And if you can all turn with me to page 2 of our books, we can do our incense lighting gathas. Together. In gratitude, we offer this incense throughout space and time to all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. May it be fragrant as earth herself, reflecting careful efforts, wholehearted awareness, and the fruit of understanding slowly ripening. May we and all beings be companions of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. May we awaken from forgetfulness and realize our true home. Hello. Good morning. I have a couple of courtesy announcements before we get started. First, I know we got a lot of people here today. So as people walk in, or if you need to make some space, we do actually have 4 seats right in a row down the front. So if you want to move, you can do it now, and nobody will judge you. But yeah, if you see people coming in that need to use seats and there's nothing available, just if you could maybe make some room, or if there's a bigger group, if we could kind of scoot in. So just be aware, be mindful. I guess that's kind of the whole deal here anyway. So um, other than that, we do have a space downstairs available if anybody needs to step away for any reason. We've got Legos down there. I forget what is the age range, up to 99, but I forget how young. So um, feel free. We also have an extra bathroom downstairs, as well as through this curtain here. We have 2 restrooms in there. We also ask that we don't walk in front of the dais during the service. Just to kind of keep the space sacred, and also we've got cameras because we're streaming, so it kind of keeps the view clear for them. Also, as the service concludes, we ask that we kind of either step out downstairs into the other room, just to kind of keep this space a contemplative space. And then also, if you do decide to go downstairs, or just kind of make sure that we can kind of pick up after ourselves too, and kind of keep the space clean. Leave it like you found it. With that, why don't we all stand up and say hello to each other? I go for refuge to Buddha, my deeply awakened mind, the living source of understanding and compassion, which must be cultivated to be known fully. I go for refuge to Dharma, the path of mindful living, leading to healing, joy, and enlightenment, the way of peace, which must be cultivated to be known fully. I go for refuge to the Sangha, the loving and supportive community of practice, realizing harmony, awareness, and liberation, which must be cultivated to be known fully. I am aware that the 3 jewels are within my heart. I vow to realize them. I vow to practice mindful breathing, smiling, looking deeply into things. I vow to understand living beings and their suffering. Kindness and compassion, and to practice joy and equanimity. I vow to offer joy to the one person in the morning and to help relieve the grief of one person in the afternoon. I vow to live simply and sanely, with few possessions, and to keep my body healthy. I vow to let go of all worry and anxiety in order to be light and free. I am aware that I owe so much to my parents, teachers, friends, and all beings. I vow to be worthy of their trust, to practice wholeheartedly, so that understanding and compassion will flower, and I can help living beings be free from their suffering. May the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha support my efforts. May the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha support my efforts. May the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha support my efforts. If you can turn to the next page, we're doing the Heart Sutra. Dhamma prajna paramita hridaya sutra bodhisattva of great compassion from the deep practice of paramita. Perceive the emptiness of all five skandhas and deliver all beings from their suffering. Form is no other than emptiness, emptiness no other than form. Form is emptiness, emptiness form. The same is true of feeling, thought, impulse, and consciousness. O Sariputra, all dharmas are empty. They are not born nor annihilated. They are not defiled nor immaculate. They do not increase nor decrease. So in emptiness, no form, no feeling, no thought, no impulse, no consciousness. No eye, ear, nose, tongue, mind, no form, sound, smell, taste, touch, or objects of mind, no realm of sight, no realm of consciousness, no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, no old age and death, no extinction of them, no suffering, no cause of suffering, no cease from suffering, no path to lead out of suffering, no knowledge, no attainment, no realization, for there is nothing to attain. The Bodhisattva holds on to nothing but prajna, paramita. Therefore the mind is clear of any delusive hindrance. Without hindrance there is no fear. Away from all delusive views one reaches final nirvana. All Buddhas of past, present, and future, through faith in prajna, paramita, attain to the highest perfect enlightenment. Know then the prajna paramita is the great Dharani, the radiant fearless mantram, the utmost supreme mantram, which is capable of allaying all pain. This is true beyond all doubt. Proclaim now the highest wisdom, the prajna paramita. Gate, gate, hara gate, hara samgate, bodhisvaha. Gate, gate, hara gate, hara samgate, bodhisvaha. Gate, gate, hara gate, hara samgate, bodhisvaha. Dhamma prajna paramita hridaya sutra. Hello. um, I wanted to do something a little bit different today. Um, as some of you may know from some of my previous talks, I grew up in the Southern Baptist Church, and there was one thing that I never saw there ever. Um, I never saw somebody in the middle of a sermon raise their hand and ask the Reverend a question. Um, in fact, it was actually pretty discouraged. Um, and if you were to ask a question, the thing that I would hear more often than not is, and you could probably say it with me, God works in mysterious ways. um, and this is one thing that I really appreciate about Buddhism and even my Zen tradition, to focus that more in, is that the discourse between the student and the teacher is really important. And I've had several of these interactions in the last few weeks where I got to have these really long one-on-one discussions with people. And I thought, you know what? Like, that's something I want to make sure that we also get here in the Sangha. Because usually we're just up here yapping, as they say, for a while. And according to Kunga, I yap for too long. So if I have you yap back, then you all get to share the burden of the long service. So that's what I wanted to do today. And Upaya, if you could do me a favor, if you could go grab the other microphone, if we have it ready. If not, I will be more than willing to repeat the questions as we hear them. But I actually want to just talk. I want to have an open session. And if people have questions or comments, I want to make this a little bit more reciprocal today. Is that okay with everybody? Cool. And if everybody is too shy, then you put me on the spot and I'll improvise. But hopefully we're not feeling shy today. So yeah, let's just do hand raising.
I have a question about the questions that we can ask.
Yeah.
Like, does it pertain specifically only to Buddhism, or can it like go just a little bit off by any chance?
If you can think of something that has nothing to do with Buddhism.
Like just anything? So basically anything except Buddhism.
No, you can think I'll tell you this. This is my one thing. You have to be okay with me saying I don't know. Because I don't know everything, and I don't want to be the kind of teacher that kind of just BS's you through a question because I can't stand not knowing the answer. I'm also not going to give you it's a mystery, you have to figure it out yourself. I'm just going to say I don't know. Or I don't know, let's figure it out, or let's consult Google the Oracle. But you can absolutely ask questions that may not specifically have to do with Buddhism itself. And I think I'm a big proponent that Buddhism should be a practical philosophy. So it should be applied to everything you're going through in your life. I think there's something that you could bring Buddhism to.
You mentioned in your talks earlier before that you researched or you looked into Taoism as well as other religions during your time in college. Did you ever explore the mythology component of those religions before?
Not really. When it came to Taoism, I didn't go much further than the Tao Te Ching and the oh my gosh. So the butterfly guy. You might know if you're asking this question. There you go. Yep, I read that book as well, which for me in that point of my life, I really appreciated the way that they talked about the Tao. I think I was kind of breaking up with the idea of the personified God, if that makes sense. And for me, hearing about the Tao as a sort of, nameless, formless thing, I think it kind of helped me to come back in a way to that and open myself up a little bit to bigger things. One thing that stuck with me with Taoism is the Zen tradition out of China and in Japan is very much a marriage between the Taoism and the Buddhism kind of putting together. So there's a lot that goes in there. I will also say that if you have not read the Tao Te Ching, it's one of the most highly recommended books that I would give. It's not a Buddhist book. It's also very short. I think 86
Yeah.
passages. Yeah, you could read it in one sitting, and it's really really good. You get something different out of it, and also each sort of writing is kind of stands on its own. So you could literally just like flip open and read. um, if you don't know the story behind it, Lao Tzu, who was a really wise person in China. I don't remember the reason, but he was leaving China. He's like, I'm out. And the story goes that the guard who was going to let him out of I think it was actually the Great Wall of China, is going to leave China, recognized who he was and was like, wait a minute, I know who you are. You're Lao Tzu, the wisest man in China. And he's like, I'm not going to let you through these gates until you write down all your wisdom for me. And so, and if you think crossing the border is annoying now, imagine having to write a book before you can leave. But apparently he sat down and wrote this little book and was like, all right, fine, here. And then he left, never to be seen again. Riding on a water buffalo, I think, it's pretty cool, actually. So yeah, I think there's a lot that parallels with Taoism and Buddhism. I did not get a whole lot into the mythologies at that time in my life. I was kind of breaking away from a lot of these sort of exoteric and kind of like spiritual realms and gods and deities. At the time, for me, it was more of the kind of concrete philosophy that I really liked at that point. Cool. You're allowed to have more than one question too. You have one over here. Oh, over there.
Just real quick, how do you answer the question people ask, is Buddhism a religion?
Am I allowed to answer a question with a question? I guess, what is a religion? I think a lot of times when I'm talking with people, especially in different philosophies or things, it's really important to define words. You didn't ask this question, but I often get asked the question, like, do you believe in God? And I have to jokingly say, well, half the room probably says I'm atheist and the other room says that I'm a theist. So it really depends on who you ask. So I'll ask you, Gail, what is religion?
People here, and it's a common question that I've had in the past. I think the word religion, what it conjures up for me immediately is a deity,
Yeah.
unwavering dedication to a deity.
Well, I'm going to answer the question maybe not super directly. I gave a talk to a college once, and it was a room full of mostly Christians. And I know that in our country, we have even if you're not a practicing Christian, you see a lot of our practices through this sort of Christian goggles, just because that's the language that we have to understand things. And so I will give a better analogy that I think also our culture will understand. I think you'll probably pull more parallels to a university system than you will a church. For instance, we have pictures of the Buddha, we have statues of the Buddha, and I want you to think not of the icons of Mother Mary or Jesus when you see these, but when you walk into a university and they have statues of their founders, or they have pictures up of some of the teachers and faculty that they revere, because I think that's probably a closer analogy to what we have. Buddha was just a little guy. He was great. He was really wise and he had some great teachings, but he was by no means perfect. In fact, some of the best stories of Buddha are him being wrong and his followers calling him out on it. As far as deities and things like that, I've given some talks about ideas of bodhisattvas and things like that. And there's definitely realms of Buddhism that get a little magical. But I think it is almost as a parable in a way, that if for you holding on to these sort of extra, I guess, real sort of ideas helps you to keep more connected, then I think that's fantastic. And if you see them simply as a story or a parable to learn by, I think that's great too. I think there's room for both. I think what Buddhism is not is a sort of the single narrow line that you have to sort of believe in this certain way. And I will point out one very glaring cool thing about this temple that you will not see in a lot of more, let's say, mainstream religions. We have teachers from very different schools teaching together. If you were to put, myself, and Kunga, and and Igesu, and so on and so on, all on, we would probably have very different ways of approaching and answering these questions. But the fact that we can all sit here and teach together kind of shows you how we're more of a faculty on in a school than priest in a church. You would be very hard pressed to find a church where they have a Catholic priest one day and then a Methodist reverend the next day and then a Baptist reverend, and they're all sort of getting along. So I like to think of it that way, but also it's maybe a little bit more than a university, because I think that if you want to find a more spiritual connection, I think that there's something for you there too. Guess it's a little fluid. We'd have some hands over here if you still have your hands.
Do you have any reading you would recommend as like an intro to Buddhism, just to get a general overview of the concepts and ideas around it?
Yeah, there's a few. So here's going to be the infuriating thing about Buddhism versus a lot of other religions. Most religions have their sort of central flagship text, and it makes it really easy. It's like, oh, just go to the Quran, just go to the Bible. And in Buddhism, it's the sort of irony that Suji told me is that in Soto Zen, my tradition, a lot of teachers tell their students, I don't want you reading anything for 2 years. I just want you to practice, to sit. We're going to learn how to be compassionate and present. And then at that point, you've kind of gained the eyes to then take the teachings. I'm not saying to do that. I don't know if that's right or wrong. I think there's some wisdom in that, because I think it's sort of reading the manual and thinking you know how to operate the machine before you've ever interacted with the machine kind of mentality sometimes. I think there's a lot of teachings that have been misinterpreted throughout the years. I'll give you one example. The shogun and samurai in Japan were very Buddhist. They are also all murderers for hire. And they used a lot of Buddhism to justify their violence, because they took the text saying, there's no self, so I can just go kill people. Because who's dying? Nobody. It's the oneness. They're like, and I'm like, well, wait a minute. And so I would say with any text, to go back to your question, there's not really a sacred text necessarily. And I would be very cautious of taking a text as sacred or as like dogma in Buddhism. And I think the way that you interpret and you hold these texts is really important, which is why we've got the 3 jewels of Buddhism. We've got the Sangha, which is the community. We've got the Dharma, which you could interpret as the readings or the teachings themselves, and then the Buddha or a teacher. And I feel like you need all of those to really get the most out of it. I think there could be a danger of grabbing a bunch of texts by yourself without a teacher, without a group, and trying to make, your ends out of it. That being said, to kind of actually answer your question, well, anybody who's in the preceptor meeting right now, what do we have you reading right now? The Dhammapada, yeah. And the Dhammapada is a collection of supposed sayings from the Buddha. And I think it's great. I also think it's a great study in why the Buddha wasn't perfect. Because one of my favorite things to do is to argue with the Dhammapada and be like, no, that's wrong. That's outdated. Which I love, because it's freeing coming from such a in my younger life such a rigid system to be able to kind of wrestle and argue with the teachings away too. One of my good friends is Jewish, and I really connect with how they sort of tackle the Talmud and the Torah, because there's a huge tradition in the Hebrew tradition of arguing against or working with the text, which is sort of ironic when you think, you know, Christianity coming out of that is such a rigid system, when the people who originally started the thing, it's much more of a discourse than a thing. So the Dhammapada would be a great place to start. I know that any of the writings by Thich Nhat Hanh are really great. I'm not gonna lie, he's got this little series of the little books, which you've all probably seen. There's like how to sleep, how to sit, and those are really great. They're really easy reads. There's a lot of wisdom in there. It's really accessible. I also, and I know in talking to Young Su, I think this is how they operated for a long time. Maybe finding a sutra that you really connect with. It could be the Heart Sutra that we chant every day. I forget if it was the Sando Kai. What was the one that you really love, Young Su? The Shin Shin Ming. That's it. Yeah.
It's a little booklet, 25 stanzas,
Mm.
the same basic story that who wrote the Tao Te Ching, very bright man, don't know where he went afterwards. He was asked, please listen. My first teacher said, this is all you need to know about Zen. Read this and forget it. And he told me that for the first year, just read it, don't contemplate it. So
Yeah.
it's a process, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
an integral part of life.
I've also said this before, and thank you, Young Su. Throughout most of history, we didn't have the access to literature that we do now, right? I mean, duh. Even my parents didn't have anywhere near access to what I have today, and I'm sure I don't have to look too many generations back before they didn't even have literacy, right? You had to be really rich to even know how to read, and the ones that could read, they cherished their books because it had to be handwritten and scribed. And so a lot of times the scholars maybe only owned one or two books. And what made you a sort of dedicated reader wasn't how many books that you read, but how well you maybe knew your text that you did have too. So I think there's some wisdom and also some weight off your shoulders that, you know, even if you just find one book that resonates with you or one sutra that resonates with you and you dedicate some good time to that, I think that is probably maybe a better practice than trying to read everything and getting it all in. It's the whole, you know, adage of the benefit of being a hawk over a duck. A duck can do just about everything, but it can't really do anything well. I do love ducks, not to throw shade on a duck. And ducks are great because if you want to learn how to swim, they can get you started. If you want to know how to waddle, they can get you started. If you want to know how to eat bread, they can get you started. But if you want to be the best flyer, you talk to the hawk, right? And so I think there's a little bit of a balance in that too. Do you want to be a duck or do you want to be a hawk? And I think we need both. So I don't know.
What I've come to believe, and it says it in the little booklet, this is the essence of Zen. It's a lot different than, this is all you need to read. And the other thing that's very interesting is, you know, we're talking about attachment. Well, I gotta admit, I got attached to my favorite translation. There are other translations. There was one in our old rituals and practice book. So, yeah, don't get too hung up on it.
It's more of an oral tradition than it is a textbook.
No, actually, I would say the tradition is more of a lineage tradition.
Oh,
So
that's-
it is very student to teacher,
Yeah, that-
to the point that a big part of when I took my vows, and this is true of I think every priest I've ever talked to, we trace our teacher and their teacher all the way back to Buddha, which is really amazing because there's not a lot of people that can trace any lineage 2,500 years back. So yeah, I guess some of it is oral. A lot of the people in my lineage could not read. There's a yeah. scholastic history, commentary, and tradition. A lot of the philosophy in Buddhism is the result of commentators on texts. That's why, like, some of the most famous texts in Buddhism are things like Tsongkhapa's commentary on Nagarjuna. That's also kind of connects with what you mentioned about Buddhism being a university or scholastic tradition. And I would point out that the European universities were also religious institutions first. So thank you. Yeah, I think that's a good point too, because things kind of change and evolve over time, right? You said even like the institutions in Europe, they were one thing in the beginning and they've kind of changed. And I know to even look at the Christian tradition, a lot of the big scholars, I mean, you look at like St. Thomas Aquinas, who is one of the big ones. His whole thing was like, well, how can I think about and wrestle with these ideas, and even answering the question, like, is God even real? Like, how do I, tackle with these things? And he had his own sort of ways to deal with that. And I feel like the rigid dogma that we have in a lot of things, I think even that is pretty new. And another thing that I will say is, Buddhism is not greedy, which I probably should have said that with your question. You can come to Buddhism and bring your other faith with you. You can be a Buddhist and a Christian. You can be a Buddhist and an atheist. You can be a Buddhist and a Jew. I feel like in a lot of ways it can be supplemental, but also you can just be a Buddhist too, which I think is something that's really refreshing for me too, because I don't think a lot of traditions have that sort of openness and bringing together too. And like you said, I think it's really important to look back and look at the cultural context of things too, and realize that the way things are today is not the way that they always have been or always need to be, which is refreshing sometimes. Yeah.
Hey, so I have a quick question on maybe a gray area, and this is just personal. Let me preface this by saying that I'm feeling very peaceful and very happy with how my life is going. But in the case of something terrible, let's say, to happen, what does violence look like in a loving way? And I guess, what can you say about violence from a Buddhist perspective? Obviously, there's, we've got to maintain life as a key part in letting life live and so on and so forth. But I don't want to put too much into it because there's nothing really that I could put into it that I personally am thinking about or feeling right now. But like, what would you say what would you say about violence?
Sure. And I'm not sure from your question if we meant violence coming from us or coming at us. I would say, as a Buddhist, our philosophies are really rooted in that sort of interdependence. So I'd say it probably doesn't matter if it's coming at us or at us. We're probably going to talk about it a lot in the same way. If you all turn around, and I'm sorry for the people that are online right now, I'll do my best to describe it. If you look at the painting in the gold, we have a very wrathful deity, is what they're known as. I know I told you that the gods and the bodhisattvas, if you want to believe they exist, go for it. I believe that's Vajrapani, but I'm not 100% sure because they're not holding the Vajra that Vajrapani usually holds. But you've got the big, the dark skin, which in a lot of the Indian paintings, the darker the skin, the more powerful that you are. And that's how they describe that, how they make it in the painting. So if you see anybody with really dark skin, that means you have a lot of power. You've got all the fire going up. They're usually standing. They're not sitting like everybody else, basically. It's very active in action. Vajrapani, the wrathful deity, is sort of the bodhisattva of sort of action and power and things like that. And I want to sort of break down violence and think of it not so much because violence, I think there's a lot of judgment behind that and a lot of sort of ideas by that. But let's just think of the sort of wrathful, big action in a way. And then we can think of skillful versus unskillful, which I think is a good way to think of this. Vajrapani represents those teaching moments that are kind of wrathful, the sort of kick in the pants that you needed from your teacher because you just weren't doing the right thing. The sort of big life events that are not comfortable, right? Because we learn a lot from those. They're not necessarily good or bad. They're not comfortable. It's sort of the uncomfortable teaching moments. But also, these deities are also evoked in ourselves too. We don't see these deities as a sort of outside looking down from the clouds. The Vajrapani is evoked in your own actions too. So the important thing, I think, is you can use these big, visceral, uncomfortable actions, but you have to do it skillfully. You have to keep in mind the Eightfold Path. You have to keep in mind the precepts. Because if we're just lashing out for our sort of own ends, you're actually being very helpful in that moment to the person, right? I come from my day job. I'm a behavior analyst, and B.F. Skinner, love him or hate him, there's a quote in one of his books that says, oftentimes you see the person yelling at the other person to get them to do something, not because it's actually helping that person do the thing, but because it's actually reinforcing the behavior of the person yelling, that they're getting something out of it. They're feeling that power, that control. And you see a lot of that dynamics where you can justify the wrathful action because, no, I am helping this person do the right thing, when what's actually happening is the only person they're really helping that moment is themselves, because they're having these big things that they're trying to work through. And so we have to be very careful when we are evoking the wrathful deities, because if that's done without compassion or without wisdom, it becomes very destructive. When you tie that wrathful action with compassion and with wisdom, it becomes a really powerful, important thing. And so maybe the question shouldn't be, how do I act violently? But is my sort of wrathful actions, am I constantly informing this with compassion and with wisdom? Yeah. Yes, please do.
Everything I agree with Son Shin. I think we're talking about what we're up against right now. It's the reason I'm wearing this protest hat. We're up against everything's flying in this moment, folks. But we all know, come January 20th, some stuff is going to happen. There's such fear in communities that something's going to happen. I'm pretty sure we're going to see some violence. So what I would say is, I heard the term karma is action. Absolutely. Karma is also inaction. You have the opportunity to protect an innocent and you don't, then that's your karma. And as a Buddhist monk, I will say there is a time where I might kill. You try to hurt a child and I can stop you. I will do whatever I can to stop you.
And I think it's maybe more of the anxiety of my mind. Thank you. It's more of the anxieties of my mind coming to what ifs, where I have to wrestle with the fact of whether or not I'm going to do something. And I guess an activity in the times of definitely not using violence, like being at Meyer and somebody pisses me off. I'm not going to be violent towards them in the middle of a store. But if I guess staying inactive until those moments of times where there needs to be action, keeping all of those things that you had mentioned in mind, I think will definitely guide me, hopefully in a much more graceful way than if I was just to be violent, whether that's with actions or my attitude or my demeanor, constantly until the moment that there needs to be action, so that I'm not just like reactive. Exactly. So I don't know. It just kind of has been sitting in my mind, and I'm just trying to be as peaceful and as calm as possible. But I think that it's just another thing in my toolbox now to know that it's just being aware. Because I grew up in Catholicism and Christianity, and they don't really talk about this kind of stuff, to the point where, like, God will forgive you if you mess up or do something like that. But then it's like, how do I deal with the grief? And I know that I need to be not so attached to that. Like I'm aware that I need to be aware of that sort of stuff so that I'm not just being a terrible person and doing all these crazy things without, any justice on the other side or whatever. But yeah, like, I mean, if somebody's trying to hurt a kid or something, if there are just like people being tormented or getting their peace taken away from them because of ideologies or something crazy, or like money in people's pockets, that it's just something I wanted to ask about. But yeah, you guys gave me a pretty clear idea of what it is I need to do. Thank you.
Hi. I kind of wanted to build off of both things said, and ask kind of a personal question of you, Sungshin. How you maintain hope that our collective view of like compassion and love and peace, how do you maintain hope that that can effectively combat all of the non-compassionate wrath and suffering being inflicted on the world through fear?
To answer the question I think you're asking, not the one you did, like, how am I coping with November 5th? A few things, I think. One thing, and I'm going to answer this personally because I don't expect everybody in my position to be in a place where they can do this. I am queer. I am Mexican. I'm also part of a, let's say, a non-mainstream faith. So I think the target audience of the winning team is probably not me. I will say that without trying to get too much into politics, because I also don't want that to be a deciding factor of who's welcome in this Sangha. But what I will say is that, especially because I am in a leadership position, both here in the temple and also in my day job, that one way that I have sort of decided to process this is to put it bluntly, be more gay. If I can be more visible, then I will be, not just for myself, but for the people around me who can't do that, who aren't to the place where they can do it safely or aren't to the place internally where they feel comfortable. I want to be a giant open door saying that it's okay, and I want to be a model to say that this is okay. I think there is a big knee-jerk reaction to kind of hide away and to blend in. I have pretty light skin for a Mexican, and I feel like it would be very easy for me to be white passing. which might be a safer option for a lot of situations. But leaning into that culture, I think, is my protest in a way, and also shows people that it's okay. um, I'm remembering my nana and my tata and what they taught me. I'm embracing the lessons that they taught me because for my culture, for instance, one thing that I know at my age, it's on myself, but I'm the first generation that can't speak Spanish in my family. And I just think of, how to stay connected to my culture has to be a fight, because my entire life it's been hidden from me or taken away from me. And so to actively embrace that, especially in times like now, that shows people, and not just people who share my cultural background, but shows that it's okay. Like, you can keep embracing that and fighting for that. Personally, that's helped me a lot. Just to be more visible. I actually made a patch of, I don't know if you've seen my jacket, but the day of the I think it was the day or the week of the election, I made this patch that said, queer visibility is a rebellion. And then I've also been saying that queer joy is a protest. And you could also insert anything into there. Whether it's, Mexican joy is a protest, or Black joy is a protest. Um, being joyful for being a woman is a protest. I feel like in a lot of ways combating it with that, because they would love to see us hide away or be shameful, and any act that you can get to show that joy and to show that visibility, I think shows that, at least in that moment, all the things and all the legislation's powerless. I will also, to use more direct Buddhist teachings, Buddha also boiled down all the woes in the world to the three poisons, which delusion, hate, and greed. And if you think of a lot of the things that have gone wrong on both sides of the aisle here, it's a lot of delusion, it's a lot of hate, and it's a lot of greed. And so I think, how can I actively fight against those things? And I think trying to find the sort of incompatible opposites is the way to fight it. You can fight delusion by being adamantly fighting for clarity, for fighting for truth at every turn, and for speaking up when people are speaking from a place of delusion, which I will tell you, my one superpower is being a white passing Mexican, because a lot of people run their mouths not knowing who they're running their mouths next to. Also, being a queer person who, I don't know if anymore, but sometimes I can pass for maybe not so much. A lot of people run their mouths and they don't know who they're sitting next to. And so it gives me a lot of opportunity to kind of see people mask off, and I can speak against that delusion, seeking clarity. How do you combat hate? If I can actively sort of search for that love and joy, and maybe not outwardly, but inwardly too. If people are actively doing things that are dehumanizing me or hating me, then how can I be more human? How can I find more joy in my life? Because that's how I dissolve that. How can I bring more joy to people around me? And then lastly, greed. How do you fight greed? You become more giving. We may come to some economic times when coming together, realizing that we just, when everything boils down to money and power, how much power is it to put our self-worth in things that you can't put a price tag on, and to help people that are in need, selflessly? You can't be bought when you're worse there. My first teacher gave me this sort of image of, imagine you're in a completely pitch black room, completely dark, and then a single spark. Think of an empty Bic lighter, which is there such thing as an empty Bic lighter? Because they get stolen before they get empty. So if you've ever reached the end of a lighter, you're lucky. But you click the wheel and a single spark comes out. And what happens to the pitch black room? Completely illuminates. The teeniest amount of light can cut through the thickest black of night. And I think in a lot of ways, the things that I said, that sort of clarity and love and selflessness can cut through even the darkest sort of day. There's also a saying that my friend who I was talking about before, who is in the Jewish faith, and I'm going to butcher this saying, but it says, you're probably not going to be able to change the world, but you could change one person's world, which I really like too, because there's a lot going on and there's a big wheels in motion, and maybe we can't stop those. But even if it's just in little moments at a time, we can make a big difference to ourselves and to the people around us, I think, for sure. So I don't know if that helps or not. That's how I've been staying sane.
Thank you. That helps a lot.
I know. we are getting close to the end here. So yeah. I mean, I like question and answers. Also, I know I wasn't able to get to everybody, so I do have a temple email. All the teachers do have an email here. So why don't we do one more question and then we'll do some close ups, okay? And please feel free to email us with more. And if you want to do more of sort of open-ended talks like this, let us know. Honestly, it's less prep for us. So. Yeah, so Shin, SONSHIN @zengr.org if you want to get in contact with me.
I feel a weird sense of guilt getting the last question. I'm sorry, everyone. So I'm very interested in the Heart Sutra. I appreciate that we chant it each time, at least in my experience, it's been each time. So correct me if I'm wrong on this, but from my perception, looking at the Heart Sutra, it seems like a lot of statements that seemingly pose kind of these almost contradictions or sometimes diametric opposites. And I know for me as a therapist, I'm trained in dialectical behavior therapy. There's something that's like a part of this idea of like contradictions that almost can create a synthesis that's really interesting to me. But I'm curious if I could hear a bit about your perspective of what exactly is going on here, or if that in itself stands against what the sutra is achieving. You can also say, I don't know, or direct me somewhere else.
I'll tell you that I guarantee everybody you ask about this will have a different answer. I love the Heart Sutra as well. I think you wouldn't do wrong to take the Heart Sutra as your central text. And there's enough sort of... there's enough in there to keep you satisfied for a while. I'll say that. The Heart Sutra kind of talks about this idea of emptiness and form, and it is a little bit of a sort of opposite in a way. One of the best sort of analogies of that was there is a commentary by Technicon on the Heart Sutra, which is another text I would recommend. I don't remember the name of it, but somebody might. What was it? It might be that one. Okay. But he talks about waves in the ocean. Thinking of emptiness of the ocean, the form of the waves. They are kind of the same thing, but it's just sort of this like focal point versus the potential in a way. I think you could think of it that way. My favorite way to think of the Heart Sutra is to look at the very first lines. Which is the Bodhisattva of great compassion, from deep practice of prajnaparamita, emptiness of all five skandhas, and delivered all beings from their suffering. So to break this down, we have the Bodhisattva of great compassion, Avalokitesvara, which is, just as I pointed out, Vajrapani, the sort of wrathful deity of action. Avalokitesvara is what we evoke when we need to become more compassionate. And so saying this whole Bodhisattva great compassion, you can say this power within me where compassion comes from. And then it goes on to say, from the deep practice of prajnaparamita translates to perfect wisdom. We talk about Manjushri, which is the bodhisattva of perfect wisdom. So we have the part of us that's the most compassionate, practicing the part of us that has the most perfect wisdom. And when those are put together, you perceive the emptiness of all five skandhas. The five skandhas are just a way to think of your entire sort of sensory experience, your smells. It literally goes in later, the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. That's what we're talking about here. All these things become empty, which means empty as in not meaningless, empty not as in doesn't exist, empty as in almost like a freeing, to get really nerdy with you, kind of Sartre's being perceived, essence. It's sort of the potential is limitless. You get to sort of define what you are in that moment. And you're also more than yourself. You are a sort of crossing of all of your experiences and the people around you. And when you have that compassion and wisdom, it sort of breaks wide open. And it's through that sort of breaking wide open that you see the interconnectivity of all things. You're not just yourself. You're everything around you. I think in the Technicon, it talks about water going up like to the clouds and then down into the earth and growing the plants, and we consume the plants, and everything is so connected, you know. Trying to think of when does a grain become a sandwich and when does a sandwich become a food, you know. It's not really a clear line. Everything is really blurred. And so you have this compassion, wisdom, emptiness. That's where we're delivered from our suffering. I'm a very practical philosopher. And that's where I like to pull out of the Heart Sutras, how can I use this in my life? And so just as I gave you your answer about actions, I think going back to the Heart Sutra, where can we combine our compassion and our wisdom together? Because you need both.
Thank you.
I know that we usually have a time for joy and concerns. I think the reasons that we do those. Did you have a comment? Okay, fine. We'll do one more. Don't tell Kunga.
Pressure.
No,
I
you're
hope
good.
It's a good question now. Jeez, we're gonna extend it for me. Okay, dude. Yeah. I'm just curious about the notion of karma in Buddhism. As somebody who grew up in Christianity, as I did, and as you know, in a radical Protestant Christianity, could you contrast and compare karma to like the Christian notion of just like Jesus's notion of reciprocity, like you know, as someone sows, so they shall reap?
Sure.
Yeah.
Karma is a lot, I think, wider than a lot of times people try to compare it to like sin too, or reciprocity, or things like you said. I like to think that a better English word for karma is impact. I like to think of impact. Action's also a really good one too. I think cause and effect could be a good answer. As long as we're thinking of not cause and effect as a linear progression, but almost as like a field of sort of impact. Almost like a rock dropping into the water, right? Every action that we have is a direct result of all of the echoes of the universe coming into that action. And then when we move and we act, it echoes completely forward. There is a little bit of that sort of cause and effect. You do good things, you know, good things happen. But here's the other thing that's sort of the hard pill to swallow with karma. I always go back to the interdependent nature of the universe. And when we think of karma as this cause and effect linear chart, it's really easiest to be like, oh, that guy that cut me off, he's going to get it in the end. But what we don't think of is that the effect of that karma already happened, and it happened in you, in your reaction. They might not ever reap the sort of thing of that. What was reaped was what you felt, right? And because everything is so interconnected, it's not always so that sort of justification. What that means is sometimes you don't see the results of your actions until you start to see how connected the universe is.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, a lot of your actions, you don't see the results of those. And it's not until you see and reflect that you see, like, oh my God, like I've been doing this all along and it's not come back directly in my face, but it's still there. It's not something you can escape. There's a lot of rich billionaires that are not reaping the results of their actions, but a lot of people are. It's still there. I don't know if the justification will come in the end, but since I believe that the universe is all one system, it's still gonna sort of poison the pot, if you will.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think a big thing with karma is that it has to come with that idea of that interconnectivity of things too. And it takes, unfortunately, a lot of introspection and a lot of looking around to sort of see that. But it's also something that you can't escape. And you can't escape other people's karma either. It's going to affect everybody and everyone around you as well. So I like to see it almost like a field of action that's sort of reflecting off of everything more than a sort of tally of what we did or not. Okay, well, you got 5 karma points, so we're going to give you 5 good things here. It'd be cool if it was that easy, and it'd make the world a little bit easier maybe. But it also puts a lot more weight on your actions too, when every single thing, the way you breathe, the way you blink, echoes. My personal philosophy is very deterministic, and I think that that's a very important freeing thing, because what that means is that my actions are deeply connected to all the actions before me. Sort of the echoes of my ancestors through my own words. But it also means that my actions have deep, powerful meaning as well, because I'm so connected to the things around me as well. So I don't know if I made your understanding of karma that much more clouded. If I did,
that was great. Thank you.
As I said, I'm actually going to skip joys and concerns today, because I feel like the whole reason for those is to cultivate what we just did here. I know that's a really important part of our service, but also we are way over time. So I can stick around for a little bit afterwards if anybody wants to ask me any more questions. And I'd love to do this again. And if any of the other teachers watching would like to do the same, I think that would be great, because I want to have a sangha that feels comfortable wrestling through these hard things together. I think that's what makes Buddhism special. So thank you for that. I know I was a little greedy because I love these kind of days, because I get a lot out of these too, and just kind of sharing with you. So why don't we go to our closing gathas? So if we can stand together, and on page 6. Together. For all unskillful actions ever committed by me since of old, on account of my beginningless greed, anger, and ignorance, born of my body, mouth, and thoughts, now I atone for them all. Vast is the robe of compassion, a formless field of benefaction. I wear the Buddhist teachings for the benefit of all sentient beings. All beings, one body, I vow to liberate. Endless mind passion, I vow to uproot. Dharma gates without number, I vow to enter. The great way of Buddha, I vow to attain. If we can face each other and give a closing bow. One thing that I did not get a chance to do was the announcements at the end. I would like to just really quickly graze over a couple important ones. I know we're getting towards the end of the month, so as we say all the time, we do have a online meditation group that meets on Wednesdays. We also have a Dharma discussion group that we have here, Novel Kamsaka Sutra group. We also have our recovery meetings that meet here Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. I have all of our announcements on this little piece of paper that I'm going to leave somewhere very visible so that if anybody wants to write down any of this information, that might do you more good than listening to me yap about it. But I will say this, we do have a potluck on December 1st, which is coming up. And all that I ask is that whatever you bring, if you could notate the ingredients, because we have a lot of people who have different dietary needs, and so if they can make those decisions for themselves, that'd be great. So it's going to be Sunday, December 1st, right after the service. So we'll just be going straight down there after that. So I am so sorry, Kunga. I even wore my watch today. Thank you. Thank you all.